Welcome, everyone. We have a really interesting discussion lined up today. John Grady, a senior analyst at ESG, will be sharing the results of a recent ESG survey on the convergence of security and networking. John is a senior analyst with Enterprise Strategy Group and leads the firm's network security coverage, which includes firewall, secure web gateway, remote access, SASE, and zero trust. John has written for Dark Reading and has been quoted in Network World, CSO, eWeek, and Tech Target, among other publications. Francis Dinha, the CEO of OpenVPN Inc., will provide his perspective on SASE and ZTNA in the context of OpenVPN's newest solution, OpenVPN Cloud. Francis has a wide range of experience in technology leadership. He was the founder and CTO of PacketStream, the CEO at Iraq Development and Investment Projects, and of course, he co-founded and is the CEO here at OpenVPN Inc. He writes regularly for the Forbes Technology Council and has also written for or been featured in Dark Reading, Entrepreneur, Security Boulevard, and many others. Welcome.
So, as was mentioned, I'll be walking through some research that ESG recently did. This is really ESG's specialty is quantitative research, understanding what buyers are thinking about some of the top challenges in the market, how they're going about solving them, to really help vendors kind of understand that and build products that ultimately help them solve business problems. So this study in particular was a survey of over 600 cybersecurity, networking, and IT professionals that had influence over and experience with their organization's networking and security tools and processes, and had a level of familiarity with SASE. It was representative of North America and Western Europe and organizations of kind of all sizes and industries, so really cross-representative. And really what we wanted to understand was what's pushing organizations towards this idea of convergence, where are they in that journey, and ultimately what are they looking for with these types of approaches? What are they prioritizing? What challenges are they facing, and so on. So just to set the stage a bit in terms of what the modern enterprise looks like, I think we all understand kind of the drastic change that's occurred over the last few years, but it's always interesting to kind of put some numbers around where organizations are. And so kind of two things to look at with regards to this. The first is the use of cloud services. And we ask this in a lot of different ways. This is one of the simplest ways. How dependent are you upon public cloud services and public cloud infrastructure in particular? And you can see here that just about half of organizations that we spoke to said they're extensive users of public cloud services. Another 41% said they're moderate users. So very few at this point say they're either limited or not in the cloud at all. Nearly everyone's using it. It's ubiquitous. You can obviously drill down into, are you kind of cloud first, versus kind of on-prem first? And we've seen a tremendous swing over the last few years towards that kind of cloud first model, where as new things are being built, that's really where you're looking initially at putting resources and building applications and things like that. So, the things of the enterprise are kind of shifting outside the corporate perimeter is the first point. On the other side of that is the people who are accessing those resources. And obviously, over the course of the pandemic, we've seen, the shift to remote work, obviously. And now in the last, number of months, there's been more of a transition towards this idea of hybrid work and the fact that there's going to be more of a formalized plan where employees may be in the office 1 or 2 days a week, but it doesn't take away from the fact that a lot of work is still going to be done remote. So when we ran the study, the thing that stood out to me was this was really at the beginning of this year, so not too long ago, and we saw that kind of things are where organizations expect them to be 2 years from now. We've made that shift. So if you're going to be in the office full time, you're probably already back there. If you're going in a couple of days a week, you're doing that now. And a good percentage of employees, about a third, are going to continue to be fully remote. So in the aggregate, 2/3 of workers are going to have that flexibility to be outside of corporate locations. So we've known this isn't going away for a while, obviously. But to me, this stood out that so many employees are going to continue to enjoy that flexibility. And one thing this doesn't even take into account is really the idea that at this point, because applications have become so important and used for so many different facets of the business, there's a lot of need to provide access to those resources for non-employees. So contractors, partners, ecosystem suppliers, and things like that. And so you take this all together, and the idea of kind of the corporate environment has thoroughly changed and is evolved from what it was, even 2 years ago, but certainly 5 or 10 years ago. And really, this has created difficulties when it comes to cybersecurity, as you would expect. Again, putting a number on this, 59% of the organizations we spoke to said that cybersecurity is more difficult than it was just 2 years ago. What's interesting here is typically when we ask this type of question across any segment of security that we're doing research in, the threat landscape kind of bubbles to the top, as you would expect. There's bad guys out there. They're getting more sophisticated. The volume of threats is increasing, things like that. You can see that 38% of organizations said that that's one of their top challenges, and that certainly makes sense. But a lot of the other items on this list relate to that complexity we were just talking about. So the number of remote workers accessing corporate resources, increased reliance on IoT and focus there, and more devices needing to access the network. We talked about cloud applications, and certainly that's an issue, as are kind of mobile devices. And unspoken there is kind of the idea of BYOD, which has been around for a while, but I think gained a lot of traction again during the pandemic when there were shortages and people needed to do their work, and some organizations that maybe were a little more hesitant to move towards BYOD were kind of forced to embrace it. So again, there's all these different issues of complexity. And the other piece of this is the fact that most IT and security organizations are understaffed and underskilled. There's a dearth of talent, millions of job openings in the industry, and that's something that a lot of organizations are trying to fight an uphill battle against, is making sure that they have not only the right people, but that they're skilled up in the right areas, and certainly put tools in place to make those employees more effective, more efficient, and so on. And so what ultimately this has led to is this idea of convergence, and specifically of SASE. So if you're not familiar, this stands for Secure Access Service Edge. Term was coined by Gartner in 2019, I believe. So certainly predated the pandemic. So some of these trends were in place. I think what we saw was an acceleration. And I'm going to actually go through a lot of data that really pushes back against the definition I'm about to give. But from an industry perspective, what's typically held up as SASE is a predominantly cloud-delivered converged solution of network and security tools provided by a single vendor. That's kind of what's positioned as SASE. And I'll walk through why in a lot of cases that's incorrect. But the idea that you're providing kind of, outside of that definition, centralized management for more consistent policy control, but distributed enforcement, so that you're not forced to kind of backhaul traffic to specific choke points, within the corporate network, but you're pushing enforcement to the edge, closer to users. And so what this looks like in terms of some of the tools that are being brought to bear in this type of architecture are, firewalls, secure web gateway, cloud access security brokers, DLP, so on. There's a long list on the security side. On the network side, things like SD-WAN, WAN optimization, network as a service. And again, there's a kind of a common management. There's things like automated provisioning to improve efficiency, more streamlined information sharing towards the NOC and the SOC to improve telemetry and response and things like that. And regardless of where your users or your devices are, they're going through this kind of common architecture to access the resources that they need. So one of the first things that struck us as we did this research was that there was kind of immediate pushback on the idea that SASE is a single vendor solution. So we asked, how many vendors do you expect to work with as you're building out your SASE architecture, both initially and then when the initiative is complete? And you can see initially 60% said we'll work with 1 or 2 vendors. So the majority kind of fell in that camp. But that fell to 38% when complete. So in other words, most organizations that we surveyed expect to add vendors incrementally as they build out their SASE architecture. So they're kind of thinking about SASE, back to the previous slide, certain pieces of that architecture is kind of trying to converge parts of it. And as they add more capabilities, the expectation is they'll use more vendors. Now, the numbers here are less important. I do think this is point in time, and I think it will trend towards maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 vendors that will comprise a SASE architecture in most cases. But what really stands out is the fairly low percentage that say, when complete, they expect to use 1, less than 20%, and even 2, another 24%. So, Francis, first question for you. I'm curious, your view of SASE generally, and then as you think about how OpenVPN kind of addresses this space, are you trying to be a single vendor and provide all of the functions that I spoke about on the previous slide?
Okay, so here's how I would see this before I start. That was an excellent, basically, presentation. And I would like to announce here that we are also changing the name of OpenVPN Cloud to Cloud Connexa. So Cloud Connexa would be our product. But it's a very interesting model with the SASE. It's basically the convergence of network and the security aspects of it. In one hand, you have from one aspects of application and resources, but all these application and resources are distributed in the network. Whether those application or resources are on the public cloud, whether they are in the private cloud or private network. And then you have devices and users. So for me, when we're talking about on-premise, what do we mean by on-premise? In my view, I would say on-premise, we're talking about the workers and the devices, even if they are on-premise. But when it comes to application and resources, I don't see a lot of businesses are putting those things on-premise. When they say on-premise, they mean in the data center. It's still remote. So in a way, everything is becoming remote. So it's all about secure access, right? So it's a very interesting model here to see this convergence of network and security. Traditionally, it has been security has been kind of separated. You have firewall, you have the secure web gateway, but now when you see the conversion of SD-WAN and networking, and that's exactly what cloud is addressing, but it's addressing it one piece at a time. When it comes to enterprise, you're absolutely right. One vendor may not be able to fulfill all the basically needs of the SASE. But when it comes to the middle market, the small to medium size, typically they're not going to be able to afford to have a bunch of vendors and have those solutions, right? So for them, maybe they need the essential capabilities of the SASE, but not everything. So we've approached this a little bit differently here from our product, the cloud. So what we did is we're building this kind of an overlay network. We're saying, okay, don't change anything what you have here in the network. Whether you have things on premise, you have other resources sitting on the cloud, you have some SaaS services, you're running things over internet, everything leave it as it is. And we're building this an overlay network. So we have this worldwide points of presence, and each points of presence has very high speed servers, basically high performance with gigabit interface in multiple data centers for the redundancy purpose. So what we're doing with these points of presence, we had to really include the networking aspects. And the networking aspects is how these points of presence and the server would be able to leverage the backbone of the internet itself. So now we have to reinvent kind of the routing protocol. So we have to now have that mesh, maybe it's the next slide, is the mesh core network where it has to be optimized at the kernel level. So what we had to do is separate the data plane from the control and the management plane. So the data plane itself, when it comes to encryption and routing and all that, has to happen at basically at the bare metal. And that's where we deploy all these basically server, that everything it's working at the bare metal and basically at the wire speed, at gigabit speed connection. But also we have to provide route diversity. So the mesh structure, it gives us a lot of efficiency in terms of routing, and the overlay network gives us the ability and gives the ability for the customer to route based on application names rather than on IP. Yes, we do have the IP. So for instance, if you have a customer, maybe the next slide we can go to, here's what we provide in terms of the SASE and how we view this. So the SASE, you get a lot of these edge kind of capability from all the secure web gateway, IDS, IPS, content filtering. So all these kind of capabilities we're adding. But at the same time, on the cloud, we have the networking aspects of it. So think of this as basically, comes to the next slide. What we're providing to our customer is really a wide area private cloud. What does it mean, wide area private cloud? This means it's you getting an overlay network, virtual network. And it doesn't matter where basically your private cloud it is or your private network and the internet. So we have a concept of connectors. These connectors, you can drop them on a different network you have. So say you have a location in London, you have another location in San Francisco or New York, and you don't have to change your network. And all you have to do here is define how your applications are accessible through their name, through their domain name. And then have the users using a very simple, OpenVPN Connect client that will be able to access those resources. And of course, define, the type of the access control you're gonna provide. So this is the idea of the convergence. So we had to take a lot of these different concepts of MPLS and routing, and somehow we have to reinvent this and provide a completely different routing protocol to make it very dynamic. So you will get access basically to these basically resources wherever they are. So you have the user, the way we envision this, the user and devices are pretty much remote, and the resources also are remote, and the applications. So to give you an basically different use case here, this use case, for instance, secure internet access. Okay, so how do you provide a basic secure internet access, and why that's essential? Because I want to provide access to SaaS services, to other public. As you see, there's a lot of transition, and a lot of businesses are using a lot of these public cloud services. So it's very important for organization to allow the tunneling of that traffic to really going through the cloud and eventually provide that level of capabilities in terms of the secure gateway, in terms of, for instance, firewall capability, content filtering, IDS, IPS, name it, all these kind of services. That's SASE is basically in the SASE capabilities that you have. But at the same time, with our product, what we're saying is the connectors, you can define your egress point, where you want to egress to the internet. So you can egress, say, if you're having users, basically your employees connecting to London, you can have an egress in London, or you have something in San Francisco or New York, you have egress in New York. But then you can augment that with also more advanced, threat management or advanced SASE kind of capability at the egress to access the public services. So this is basically the secure internet access aspects of this, how you can provide it.
Yeah, I think this is back to me, but I would just
answer for your question.
I would agree with a couple of your points, though. I think you're absolutely right that what you really hit on is flexibility. And I think we'll talk about that a bit later, but the need, there's not a one size fits all model to this. You mentioned kind of smaller businesses maybe being more interested in that all-in-one approach. And I completely agree with that. I think they're more likely to be kind of cloud first or cloud only and look for maybe, if not one or two vendors to really standardize on for simplicity, because that's really what they're looking for is efficiency. And the other piece is the really requirement that performance take precedence. And I think it was telling that was your first slide. And that's, the first thing that organizations are looking at. They're not willing to sacrifice security. Organizations can't sacrifice kind of business performance, speed, agility, whatever the case may be, for security. So you have to check that box first, and then really do both things at once. I mean, they're not really looking to sacrifice for security either, but no one's willing to accept latency or impact user experience for security. That's kind of the issue that we've had with some legacy solutions over time.
Yeah, that's exactly, John, why we are layering this a little bit differently. So we've separated the control from the data plane, and the data plane, that's at the bare metal. But what we're doing, one thing I want to mention about a lot of vendors or the industry, they're trying to layer this more in a horizontal fashion. And I believe the horizontal integration is going to have a lot of impact on the performance of your business, because it's a multi-vendor and it's existing solution. Okay, you take email security, or you take intrusion detection prevention, and then you're layering, and then now you've got the data. It's moving through so many different layers before it hits the internet, right? But what we're doing more of a vertical integration. So we're integrating these capabilities at the actual core, at the kernel level, so where we don't lose performance at all.
Yeah, really, really critical. So I think, the question then becomes, based on, what I shared and what Francis shared, where are organizations with this initiative? And so on the left side, you can see, we found 37% of organizations say they've begun to implement SASE. Another 41% say they're actively planning to move in this direction in the next 12 to 24 months. There was a lot more interest, kind of early stage. That sounds interesting. We would have to learn more. The net was only 3% of the organizations we spoke to kind of looked at the definition, knew what SASE was, and said, that's not something that our organization is going to look at. To me, that's really kind of what's changed so much over the last 2 years. Is initially this was really for kind of distributed enterprises or organizations, I should say, in the sense of kind of lots of branch offices, lots of kind of retail locations or small offices. And that's shifted to how do you support kind of not only that, but also remote work. And now nearly every type of company, size company is a prospect for this. So that's where kind of organizations are in the journey. What are the reasons that they're interested in SASE? We asked this in two ways. So essentially provided the list that you see here on the right and said, check everything that is a reason your organization is looking to move towards SASE and looking for this type of convergence. And then what is the primary driver? And that's the dark blue bar. And you can see kind of the percentages back off because it can only select one. So top level takeaways to me here are that, obviously most organizations are looking at this for multiple reasons. It's not just kind of one, but when forced to choose one, there's no kind of single right answer, right? This is very distributed across this list. But vendor consolidation, it's on the list. It's not the primary motivation. And again, I think Francis made the point, for a smaller business, I think that's more true than maybe an enterprise. But again, comes back to that need for flexibility because people are trying to do different things with this. So back to the top, improving security effectiveness, the idea that as these tools are kind of better integrated, truly converged, you have if not a single, fewer kind of policy management consoles to worry about. You're getting better protection, you're less prone to mistakes, and things are kind of working better together. That really goes hand in hand with reducing risk. And then also we've seen over the last couple of years, SASE and the idea of kind of zero trust come closer and closer together. I think originally they were, I've used kind of the concentric circle or Venn diagram model in the past, as I've kind of touched on zero trust in its relation to SASE. Those things are coming much closer together. There's a lot more overlap, and we see this on both sides. If you have zero trust, you're looking at SASE as kind of a solution or tool set to implement that framework and those tenets. And if you are interested in SASE, it can be kind of a gateway towards more of a zero trust architecture. There's also kind of operational motivations at play here as well. About halfway down the list, 34% say they're looking to become more operationally efficient. 33% say more operationally agile. So again, that comes in a lot of ways with the shift to cloud and kind of modernization of this infrastructure. So simplification, reducing cost, a lot of reasons that organizations are interested in moving towards SASE. So we asked that subset of companies that have already begun to implement SASE, for the benefits that they're seeing from this convergence. So kind of an early indicator and proof points as to, are kind of the expected benefits being borne out. And I think the answer was a resounding yes. So overall, 85% of the respondents to this survey said they had 3 or more benefits from this convergence. So they selected multiple things on this list. At the top, faster problem resolution, be it network or security. So as you tie these things closer together, you don't have to go hunting through multiple consoles, multiple tools to figure out what's going wrong. Reduce security solution costs. So as Francis was saying, if you do integrate, and kind of reduce your vendors and your tool set, you're going to ultimately save some money directly. Again, not a prime motivation, but something very common from a benefit perspective. And I think that's great, because we often in the security side have to kind of prove out the business reasons to make some of these decisions, talk to the board. And so even if that's not the prime motivation, having that in your back pocket is important. I think it goes without saying ease of management. If you're kind of shifting from siloed, separate tools towards something that's more converged, you're going to simplify processes, and a lot of folks seeing improvements in that area. Better alignment of policies. I think this really gets towards the overall idea of convergence. So network and security are kind of going hand in hand. You have to make these connections, make sure they're secure. And so if you can get things operationally more aligned, you're going to see fewer problems and better collaboration across these groups, and fewer incidents. So again, organizations expect better security, and those that are moving forward are seeing that. So long list of benefits here, which again is a great proof point for how early we are in the SASE journey. So among some of the key attributes that organizations are looking for when it comes to SASE, I found it interesting. And again, this probably leans more enterprise, but affects, kind of the reality for at least some organizations. And again, goes against that kind of industry definition that I mentioned at the top, primarily cloud delivered. I think that's still true, but the reality is some organizations need a hybrid model. They're still going to have employees on premises. They, for whatever reason, compliance, comfort level, skill set, may want to keep some of these tools, on premises. And so they're looking for the ability to kind of tie together that on-prem and cloud delivery mechanism into a true hybrid model. Ease and speed of deployment was mentioned quite a bit as well by 25% of organizations. And I mentioned before the fact that most aren't willing to sacrifice, and that comes through with regards to the fact that a lot of organizations are looking for best of breed. They're not willing to sacrifice efficacy or performance just for this idea of convergence. And again, more on the enterprise side, but can you start to build towards this with some of the tools you have in place? And then, perhaps kind of simplify over time and work towards a single vendor, but can you start to get moving forward on this journey, to some extent, at least with what you have in place. Towards the bottom of the list, again, all functions from a single vendor. I believe this was choose 3. So respondents were limited in how many they could choose. It's going to be very important for some organizations, not for all. It's on the list. But I think some of these other, attributes are more top of mind. So one of the things that we see a lot with regards to SASE is the idea of ZTNA, and there's been a fairly significant transition from the beginning of SASE to now with kind of where ZTNA falls in this architecture. It was kind of secondary to begin with. It's become kind of one of the pillars in a lot of ways over the last year or 18 months, and we hear about this idea of VPN replacement. And so we wanted to understand kind of where organizations were with that. And again, found that I think the reality is not what we hear a lot in the market, that most organizations really aren't far down that path. And there's a lot that aren't really looking for VPN replacement. So actually reading this from right to left, Only 7% of the companies we spoke to said they currently use ZTNA for most of their remote access needs. So they're still, they've kind of moved away from VPN and they're heavily leveraging ZTNA. Another 13% say they're currently kind of targeting specific use cases for ZTNA, but are kind of actively expanding. So they're moving towards VPN replacement. So that's 20% of the market or of the respondent base. But the vast majority are kind of much less further along that path. 50% roughly say they expect to at some point, but it's much too early. And 29% say they have no plans to move away from VPN. So I think this reflects the fact that in some cases you still need that level of network access, that ZTNA isn't a silver bullet. Large organizations have some level of complexity in place that are going to make this replacement a longer term scenario, if at all. So Francis, kind of back over to you. Curious for your view of ZTNA and how you think VPN and ZTNA can coexist.
Yeah, I know there is a whole misperception about ZTNA versus VPN. Obviously, our name is OpenVPN, so it's. I mean, the VPN is really more from a technology, but I think there are kind of two forces in the marketplace. I see there are vendors who already have VPN solutions. So it depends how VPN. I mean, traditionally, VPN was viewed as side to side, is when you give access to the entire network and so on, right? And basically, but the VPN has evolved also. So if VPN has become more and more software based, if you look at it's more, there is a lot of virtualization. Also, there is a lot of added capability in the VPN. For instance, endpoint security, access control, fine-grained access control, and all that stuff, right? So there are two forces. Either as a basically as a customer, either they have to look at this. Okay, do we actually take a VPN solution or a VPN that's provided by VPN vendors and basically evolve and support ZTNA capability? Or do we rely on some newcomer, somebody coming, hey, we're gonna kill VPN and we have the best ZTNAs? So there are those two different camps, right? There are already a lot of VPN vendors like ourselves, because we are a software base. It's a core technology, what we have in terms of the tunneling. We're adding a lot of capability when it comes to zero trust capability. In the matter of fact, all our basically access control is identity aware access with a fine grained access control. And not only that, but it's very much, you can configure this on top of just to be IP address based. You can make it application oriented. For instance, you can define particular application, whether it's a private application you have deployed on your data center, or whether it's on your VPC, whether it's on your premise. You can actually define application by name, by the DNS, and you route accordingly, and you define your access control accordingly. So that's what I elaborated on, this overlay virtual network that we have with the cloud. But at the same time, basically, you also have access control to the SaaS application. So there are three use cases. One use case is, how do you provide access to your private applications? How do you provide secure access to the internet, to the entire public internet? These are different functions you have to provide in terms of the SASE. And then how do you provide in terms of a secure access to SASE? We've seen this CASP and a lot of this stuff, capability that you have to add. So in terms of my view, it depends how you look at it. I mean, yeah, definitely VPN is evolving to really support all these capability. I mean, there are some VPN vendors, they'll tell you they have firewall capability, they have zero trust, they have endpoint security, and they have so it depends how much you integrate, right? Or whether you call it firewall, you call it UTM, even a lot of UTM products. So I really see there is a lot of kind of misperception about this. But the way we're approaching this, we do have a very mature open VPN protocol and tunneling protocol that gives us a lot of flexibility where we can incorporate a lot of these capability of ZTNA as well. So whether basically you have an application running on your premise, it's a private application, whether it's a SaaS, whether you're accessing the entire basically internet. So that's where my view is when it comes to zero trust and VPN.
Yeah, we actually see kind of the same thing where a lot of times the first motion, if you are talking about consolidation with regards to SASE, it's converging secure access, exactly as you said, for private apps, public apps, and the internet. And so, it's less about, the name of the tools that you use to do that. Sometimes that's kind of CASB, SWG, ZTNA, but that's kind of the tools as opposed to the use case, which is, you said, you have all these things. How do you ensure the right people have the right level of access to them? The other thing is, a lot of the tools that have, so there's two things on the vendor side, the tools that have been labeled as ZTNA in many cases have just kind of been taking that coarse-grained access capability and putting it into the cloud. I mean, in all cases, they don't always deliver kind of true zero trust capabilities. And frankly, users in a lot of cases aren't ready to use them. So the market's kind of got ahead of itself in kind of talking about this. And I think now we're at a kind of an inflection point where, both due to maturity, from a solution set perspective, from, users being more ready to move forward with zero trust strategies, now there's appetite to do this. And at the end of the day, it's less about what something's called and what it does. So if you're predicating policy based on identity, you're, giving more granular controls, you're staying in line, you're providing that consistency regardless of what's being accessed, then you're essentially delivering on SASE, ZTNA, et cetera, and users aren't necessarily going to care.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for us, flexibility is very important because there are so many use cases, and not all use cases apply to a particular, customer. We have customers, for instance, a use case, the only use case that they have, look, we've got everything is on internet. The SaaS, we don't have anything on premise. We don't have any private applications. So what is important in this case? Very important remote access to the internet is secure internet access. So what is that? It's content filtering, firewall capability, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, all sort of things, end device, making sure that, so that's mostly important for them. Then we have other customer use cases saying, well, we have Internet of Things. And Internet of Things don't have to access the entire internet. So we want to have a restricted access. So we have that capability thanks to the tunneling protocol, the flexibility we have there. You can say, okay, I want this Internet of Things, these devices only can access this particular applications with the name, the domain names in the public cloud, but also access these applications in the private cloud. And that's it, block everything else. So that's a whole different security model, right? And then you've got other use cases where it's only remote access for a specific, say, private application in the network. And then some, they want to have that flexibility of side to side too. I mean, in terms of the networking. So the whole idea is here, give the flexibility to our customers and provide address all these different use cases. But that doesn't mean all these use cases are applicable to one particular customer. So it depends how you look at it, right?
Yeah, we've hit that point a couple of times, but it absolutely bears repeating. Flexibility is paramount without question. So talked about kind of benefits drivers, things like that. There are challenges to consider, and I think the way to think about this is as you're getting started with a SASE strategy, starting to implement an initiative in this area, kind of learn through what others have gone through. And so we asked, what challenges have you faced with regards to getting this off the ground at your organization? And the top challenge you can see, getting cross-functional agreement. A lot of stakeholders involved in this, if you take it to kind of its logical conclusion, as you bring kind of networking capabilities and security capabilities, some of which may have data security implications, so different teams even within the security group. Getting everyone aligned can be challenging. And so really starting early can help alleviate some of those problems. But this is just as much of an organizational and kind of culture initiative as it is a technology initiative. I think, we have to break down those silos and ensure people are working together. And so getting agreement on strategy kind of at a high level is often the first step. If we're talking about kind of changing solutions, obviously migrating policies, can be problematic. And that's why we see kind of, again, back to flexibility for some organizations, again, probably up market more on the enterprise side. But if I have some complexity there, I spend a lot of time building those out. How can I kind of, move forward with SASE without starting from scratch from that regards? I think it's interesting to me that zero trust was mentioned as a driver. We've brought that up a couple times. It can also be a challenge, making sure you're aligned. Again, different folks within the organization may be more involved with zero trust. So that's, another organizational dynamic to navigate, ensuring from a tool perspective that things are going to kind of fit into that broader zero trust architecture roadmap strategy can be challenging, but obviously, it's something that you have to work through. Most organizations are looking at both of these things. It's going to be on, most radars. So kind of understand that going in, be prepared. All the way down towards the bottom, just assessing tools, kind of tactical stuff, assessing tools, getting usable technical advice. But again, something to consider, as you start to kind of plan out where you might go with regards to SASE, understanding what some of the speed bumps could be can help you get past them and kind of learn from those who have gone before. So we did want to ask organizations kind of how they are, thinking about this at a high level. So we've talked a lot about convergence and kind of wanted to pressure to test that hypothesis, so to speak, and see how folks were kind of thinking about getting started. And so gave three options. Focusing on security first with regards to SASE. So shifting tools to the cloud, converging controls, adding new capabilities, filling in gaps, things like that. Second option was focusing on the network aspect first. So, SD-WAN, WAN optimization, network as a service. That is not necessarily at the expense of security, but maybe kind of more basic security functionality like firewall or secure web gateway as opposed to data security or browser isolation or anything like that. But the focus is first on kind of building out the network side of things. And then a truly converged approach from the start. So I think, to me, based on where we are in this market, which is still fairly early, the fact that 21% said that's kind of where we're going, and that's why it's highlighted here, was kind of heartening that so many are kind of moving so quickly in this area. And the follow-up to that was, among that group that's kind of converged from the start, so to speak, what are the use cases that you're looking to support initially with regards to SASE? I'll just touch on a couple of these, Francis, and ask for your thoughts. So again, this ties back to a lot of the challenges that we saw before. So better security for remote users. That's obviously shifting to hybrid. You talked about IoT, and securing IoT deployments was top of mind here. And I found this interesting. It was actually lower on the list among those who are thinking about security first. So I think if you're thinking security first when it comes to SASE, you're thinking maybe more users and applications. If you're thinking about this more holistically, network and security together, then you're thinking about kind of things like IoT and how you provide connectivity, not just and secure connectivity at that between users and apps, but things in the network and things like that. Zero trust comes up again. And then, some of the operational aspects like improving efficiency, reducing costs, things like that. So Francis, do these use cases kind of ring true with the customers and prospects you're talking to? Anything, maybe not on the list that you see a lot of folks focusing on?
Well, actually, we do have, if you look at our different use cases, we see actually remote user access. It's very, very popular and specifically related to SaaS application, believe it or not, because a lot of these customers right now, although the SaaS application, when it comes to security access of the SaaS, is a little bit broken today. Because as an example, for instance, you have Salesforce, they do support the white listing of the IP addresses, right? Public IP addresses. So to ensure that you are connected to your private corporate network before you can access that particular SaaS application. So we're seeing actually a lot. I mean, I was surprised to see many customers in this use case that they are routing the SaaS application through the cloud. They want to ensure that all these things are routed, are secured, even the last mile. So they want to ensure that, but not routing all the entire traffic, right? And provide some level of content filtering in terms of domain name filtering, like we can block malware, we can block unwanted traffic, right? But we want to only route the kind of SaaS application that we want to route them. But at the same time, whitelist the public IP address where it's egress the traffic to say salesforce.com. But unfortunately, not all SaaS providers provide that capability of whitelisting of the IP. And whitelisting of the IP, it's kind of a broken model, right? It's not 100% secure, right? So what we are going to be basically launching is something we call it as a cloud access broker. What a cloud access broker is, it will allow us to function as an IDP proxy. And we see a lot of them ask for that. What the IDP proxy is, everybody supports SAML. All these SaaS provider has SAML capability, and they will be able to interwork with any IDP through SAML protocol. So what we're saying here, okay, if you want to ensure that you are in your corporate network and say you're using this solution of overlay network, right? What we have with the cloud. Now what you can do, you can configure your Salesforce, you can configure your Slack, you can configure your, any kind of service provider to point to us as a proxy. And then we can ensure the devices are actually connected to your corporate network before they can access the SaaS application. So that seems like it's really the model. We're seeing a lot of this use case of the SaaS application. And remote access is really the first thing, is secure remote access. But also we're seeing a lot of demand for ILT. There is a mix of a lot of ILT devices. But in a way, the ILT, they don't want to have the ILT where they have a complete access to the internet. Is really very kind of limited access, because ILT, as I mentioned, they don't have to really interact or communicate with the entire internet. So we're seeing ILT, we're seeing secure remote access. Believe it or not, we're seeing also side to side, because it seems like a lot of these organizations, they have different sites. I mean, we have one particular customer where they have about 7 different locations, right? And they want to tie these things together, but in a very efficient way, more meshed together. And that's the structure. But also they don't want to have that kind of side to side rigid model where if I'm connecting side A to side B, I want to have all the traffic flowing through back and forth. I want to pick and choose. Meaning, okay, I've got some application or some server with particular application is running here on this side. I want only some specific kind of clients can access that from this side, or specific traffic. So we're seeing a lot side to side as well, but in a much more flexible way, right? So definitely remote secure access, side to side, basically ILT, but also secure access to the SaaS application. On top of that, we're also seeing a lot of demand for generally secure internet access. That, hey, I really don't care about these kind of SaaS application, private application, but I do have a small business. I've got about 50 employees, and I don't want them to access internet just like over their, whatever, their local internet. I want to make sure everything is going through the cloud. So I want to do some content filtering, block malware, block all sort of things, right? But at the same time, I don't want to route the traffic. I just want to look at it more from a security, like, of domain name and on what kind of application they can access and they can't access. So we're seeing that use case as well in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think that's definitely been a gap among smaller organizations, so that's not surprising. And the site to site, even among kind of mid-sized organizations, maybe upper end of the SMB, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I think we've talked about kind of hybrid work. There's going to be in some cases more offices that are smaller, maybe more kind of, if you're, maybe a national company, even if you only have a couple hundred employees or something like that, smaller sites or something along those lines. So that site to site model might be more important as well.
Yeah, I mean, even us as ourselves today, I was talking with my head of our network operation. We're converging toward that model. I mean, we're kind of a medium-sized company, right? We've got a couple of 200 employees around the world, but now we've got a bunch of applications. We have QuickBooks, it's SaaS, we have Salesforce, we have Slack, we have a bunch of applications, but also we have a lot of private applications, and we have number of sites. So we are converging, even moving toward that model. We want to make sure that if we have a group of users like sales team, or we have a customer support, that they can access this, but they can access it in a very unified way. Because right now you have to manage credentials for the QuickBooks completely different than the credential and the IDP for Salesforce. So we're converging these under the same umbrella of IDP, but at the same time provide the level of security where we can route all these application and traffic through one unified cloud across the globe. So we are a very kind of, I would say, very good use case, very typical example where we have actually staff in Philippines, we have staffs in Brazil, we have staff in Europe, we have staff in US across 15 states. So, and then we have resources and application running on Amazon VPC, we have SaaS application, and we have some few on the data center, but nothing really, if you think about it from our offices. We have nothing deployed in the offices. Even if we have an employees working at the office, it's considered remote, actually. It's just providing the connectivity. You're going to the office like you're going to Starbucks. You just have your coworker in the same office, but there are no resources, applications running there. So you still have to be connected to the cloud and go through the tunnel and provide that level of security.
Right. No, that's a kind of a great case study, to kind of share how you're doing this yourselves and kind of living what, you're talking about and going through trying to solve the same problems that, a lot of your customers are as well. So I think that's probably a great place to end it. So I'll turn it, Francis, either over back to you or to our host to wrap us up.
Well, thank you. It was great.
Yeah, appreciate your time. Great conversation.